This is Professor Netta Barak-Corren. She's a law professor at our university, and she spent her sabbatical, instead of having fun and looking for things to do in her own law profession, defending us against the waves of anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli activities that happened in all over the world. She represented us extremely well, and I think she can talk to you about it a lot better than I do. So, Netta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. You see, okay, I see you see me also on Zoom. Okay, good. So it's a pleasure to be with you this evening, and thank you everybody for making the trip to Israel. And last I met Dan was actually in Chicago, so I agree, I think, with your assessment about safety in the streets. I'm here to talk to you about the establishment of the anti-boycott task force at the Hebrew University, a task force that I chair, and to tell you a little bit about how we came to be a task force, who's part of it, the kind of work we do, the challenges, and what to do about the challenges. So just to sort of begin with, I think a few weeks after October 7th, maybe a month, it was already clear that there were early signs that the boycott movement is sort of raising its head. It was pretty dormant in the years prior to that. Early on, Tamir and Asher asked me to be the point of contact for people on campus who experience boycotts. As I sort of like to tell the story, it started with maybe half an hour a week, growing to 2 to 3 hours a week, maybe a day or two, and then ultimately with a burst of the encampments to consume pretty much all of my working days. And the kind of boycotts that we have seen over this period is something that we have really never seen before. Never before have entire universities decided to cut ties with the Hebrew University. Never before we have seen this outpour of public boycotts or this massive wave of shunning and ousting and ignoring and disinviting our colleagues to various academic events and platforms. Around the summer, we decided to make this into a task force a few months before, and we established the current task force that consists of Tamir, Yossi, who's here with us, Barak Medina, also from the law school, and many of you know him as the previous rector, Oron Shagrir, our vice president for international affairs, Miss Alma Lessings, who directs the international department, myself, and a student, Mia Weinrob, also from the law school,
hey, John?
The School of International Affairs.
John? You got a second?
I don't know if I have any control over this.
Can you please mute your microphone?
Okay. So this is the team, and the kind of thing that we do ever since we established the task force, and also before, I would divide them into 3 general broad groups. We work a lot on both generating information and disseminating information. A lot of the boycotts are rooted to some degree, if not to a large degree, in wrongful information, wrongful assumptions that colleagues around the world have about us, the Hebrew University. The most common example that we have dealt with a lot over the past year is the argument that the Hebrew University sits on stolen, occupied Palestinian lands. So this is something that is a very widespread accusation We heard it from multiple, both friendly and unfriendly universities. Did very serious legal, investigative, almost historical work to really put together all of the data and the evidence showing that this is absolutely 100% false. As many of you know, in fact, Dan just alluded to that, the Hebrew University precedes the establishment of the State of Israel. We have owned the land that we sit on 3 decades before the state was established. And through all of the sort of wars, etc., kept this ownership. Of course, this is also how Hebrew University is recognized by every international sort of body, including the EU, including foreign embassies. We need to tell all of this information often, even to universities that we have ties with for 20, 30 years, because the accusation is new to them and they're suddenly embarrassed or confused and don't know how to respond to that. So this is just a bit of an example of the kind of information that we often are in need of supplying now, if we get the chance to supply it before a formal boycott is issued. That's not always the case. The second type of work that we do is essentially relationship maintenance and relationship building, even. Super important. Lots of what we do, if the cases where we were most successful, is that when we're able to either tap on existing relationships or get tipped that something is going on, and then pull on those relationships to make sure that we are heard and that the right arguments and the right information is delivered to those who need to make the decisions. We held over the past months lots and lots and lots of meetings, both in person and remotely, with university presidents, senior administrators, etc., all over the world. The third thing that we do when information and relationships are not helpful, and unfortunately, in light of the pressures we're facing, they have been not helpful in many of the cases, is we take legal action. This is something that we have been really, you could say, spearheaded on the national sort of front. Maybe because I'm a lawyer, maybe because Barak is a lawyer. This is something that we started doing very early on, and we do that today also on behalf of all universities in Israel. We retained counsels in Europe and in Canada, and we have a little bit of a legal team also in the United States. And we deal with matters with boycotts when information and relationships are no longer do the work. We also develop legal arguments and legal strategy. We go to regulators. We make our case. We have reaped quite important successes on that front. Maybe our most important and early on success in the European Union. We approached the regulator essentially on research and innovation in the EU. This is the commissioner, part of the European government, who deals with everything related to research and innovation. All of the major research grants that our researchers excel in competing for are handled through this office. And we were able to present a legal argument that persuaded the commissioner to issue a formal instruction and declaration that cutting ties with Israeli universities is illegal, a form of discrimination. Of course, they did it. That halted and to some extent reversed the boycott for an impressive amount of time. But as we realized, the victories in this field are sometimes short-lived, and our work didn't end there, and we still have to fight our ground also in Europe with individual boycotting universities that were maybe deterred for a while, but not indefinitely by the official position of the European Union. Is we still do a lot of work in this area. Maybe I'll give you an example in a second. So this is an overview of the kind of actions that we're taking. I want to talk a little bit about the challenges. How does it look like now? handling or countering the boycott. Look, I think that maybe the most challenging part is that the boycott is a never-ending, constantly shifting campaign. As I said just now, we see that we can't really feel satisfied and just move on even after we secured important victories, because we haven't really secured them. They're fleeting. I'll give you two examples. The first, we were very happy a few months ago after we did a lot of really impressive, I think, in relationship and informational work in the Netherlands, which Yossi sort of led with all of our contacts and friends there, and we disseminated information. We made our case against the boycott, which resulted in a really impressive, long, nuanced letter signed by all important Dutch university presidents against the boycott, published publicly in the Dutch press. And we celebrated it rightfully as a major win against the boycott movement. Now, the beginning of the academic year, many of you heard, if not all of you, about the events in Amsterdam, but we can tell you that things have become much more difficult, very difficult for us on Dutch campuses much before the events after the soccer match between Tel Aviv and Ajax. We have seen a flood of boycotts and boycott initiatives coming from the Netherlands merely months after all of those university presidents said that they're against the boycott from those institutions, including university presidents that reversed course, or so it seems, at least. It's very common now in Europe to, on the one hand, not take official position on the boycott, but on the other hand, to establish ethics committees solely for the purpose of evaluating research projects coming from Israel. And then the main purpose that these ethics committees serve is to deter researchers in those institutions from collaborating with Israeli colleagues. The few brave folks who try to pass their project through these committees get only one answer, which is no. And so we have been fighting some of these decisions, but this has become very common in the Netherlands. So on the one hand, they're able to maintain this facade of non-boycott. On the other hand, it's becoming very hard to create collaborations with the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is one of the most important countries with which Israeli researchers have collaborations in Europe. It's more important than some of the other boycotting players. Another example is Antwerp University in Belgium, which again, we have worked very hard on collaborating with a former rector on reversing a decision of an ethics committee that declared that the Hebrew University cannot be a party to a joint collaboration with local folks from Antwerp, researchers who wanted to do research with Israeli colleagues. The ethics committee said no. We helped and provided information and created a relationship from scratch with the former rector in Antwerp, who then went to appeal this decision, secured an enormous win with the Executive Council of Antwerp, 8-1, who thought and decided to reverse the decision of the ethics committee. A few months after, a new rector, new reality. Just this past week, the Executive Council decided that that decision is only good for that specific project, even though the grounds for the reversal was to clear the Hebrew University of all of the blood libels against it, including stolen, occupied land, etc. Only good for that project. No more appeals can be submitted on decisions of the ethics committee. And no more projects with Israeli universities. So again, going back to the point that oftentimes, unfortunately, we see that our victories are not something that we really secured, and they tend to be fleeting and short-lived, unfortunately. A a major part of the issue is that university presidents and university administrators face a lot of pressure from both students in some countries and also faculty. And they face it very hard to sustain the pressure. This is why the legal steps that we're taking are very important. We now have a new and very severe front with Ghent University in Belgium that escalated essentially in 10 different consortiums, seek to oust the Israeli partners. We're now fighting it in the EU and hope to consolidate the negative position of the EU on the boycotts into something that maybe would really to turn Ghent into an example that would scare, we hope, other universities. But this is a fight that we're still fighting. The social pressure. So I mainly talked about the public boycotts, but all of this chilling environment against collaborating with Israeli professors, with Israeli researchers is spreading, and it's spreading way beyond the borders of Europe. We see it in Canada, we see it in the United States, we hear about it from both students and faculty. This is a major challenge. And I think we cannot view it separately from the rotten intellectual foundations of many disciplines that for maybe decades have let themselves to be consumed by anti-Israeli bias, which now in turn make it very difficult, not just for researchers who work in these fields to state other opinions, but also for researchers in other disciplines. So I gave you a little bit about our team, what we do, the challenges. I want to just spend a few minutes to talk about generally what I think we should do next. This is, I think, we live in probably historic times. I think we all recognize that by now. And the world keeps changing and turning. And we've just seen over the past months, major geopolitical changes, including just now in the United States. I think we really need to take a moment to build a good strategy on how to navigate ourselves in this sea of change. It needs to be both smart legal strategy on how to tap onto laws and regulations. It also needs to be an academic diplomacy strategy, how to deal with the sort of dearth of illegitimacy that we have encountered. So I think this is something that's worth our time and our kind of strategic thinking to do this work and maybe lead the way as we did for other Israeli universities also on that front. I think we need to establish collaborations. We're already doing that to create new collaborations. It has not just the advantage of the collaboration itself, but to fight this public norm, this changing social norm, that collaborating with Israel is illegitimate, that you should be ashamed of yourself if you are collaborating with an Israeli colleague. All of these new collaborations are good also for fighting over the social norm in academia. And I think they're super important beyond the actual collaboration in the field that's obviously important in and of itself. And I think that this is a task maybe for, more than a decade. But again, I think that forums like that maybe would want to think about it, how to redeem entire disciplines that essentially got consumed by lack of academic rigor and bias against Israel, how to create new bookshelves, how to create environments that are actually rigorous and inclusive of various forms and of ideas. This is a major undertaking, but I think that we would not have seen the boycott spread as it did if it wasn't for an intellectual environment that enabled that and facilitated it. And we will not see the boycott die without pushing back against these intellectual foundations and leading the way with new intellectual frameworks. And I think this is a job for us in academia. Nobody else can do it. I'm happy to take questions. Gabriela could, if you put them in the chat, Gabriela could also take them from the Zoom. Yes.
If anybody would like to ask a question, you can send it to me, Gabriella Rosenstein, on the Zoom chat, and I will read it out to Professor Netta Barak-Corren. Would anybody like to ask a question directly from Zoom? Gail, yes. Just a moment. Gail, if
Of
you
course.
can.
Yeah. I'm sorry if I've missed this, but this is Hebrew University. Is there, of course, the same must be happening with other universities, and is there kind of a team approach of collaboration on successes and strategies?
Among all Israeli universities, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I alluded to that, but only briefly. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to expand on that. So the Hebrew University, in fact, was pushing for the establishment of a national team to counter the boycotts early on, and to our delight, I think, such national team was established during the summer, and there is a national coordinator that was appointed by the Association of Israeli University Presidents. In Hebrew, the name of the association is Vera. So we have a national coordinator. He's a former ambassador. His name is Emmanuel Nachshon, and we now coordinate on multiple aspects. Whenever somebody is getting a new boycott or hears about a new boycott, we have our network and groups to discuss that. And oftentimes we are able to make the connections and to coordinate on a strategy when we realize that something is applicable or relevant to many of us or to a few of us together. As I said before, we also have shared legal counsel. So the legal counsel that we, the Hebrew University, found and employed early on, we expanded the contract and retained him in Europe for the year, and enlarged the team such that we have now the capacity to coordinate strategy and deal with individual cases for all universities. So just now, we're dealing with one of those coordinating challenges with Ghent University from Belgium that I mentioned it before, decided to oust the Israeli collaborators from all of its projects, turn to the EU. This is something that we handle as Israeli universities. I oversee legal strategy for all Israeli universities. This is our contribution as the Hebrew University to the national effort. And so we do all of this collaborative now, and I think it's very good. I think this is exactly how it should be, because the boycott movement has a portfolio on each of us separately, but the arguments are very similar. And this is just pretext. The goal is to oust us because we're Israeli. So it makes a lot of sense to collaborate, and we're all in this together despite our sort of usual competition for students and faculty in day-to-day life.
And just remind me, does this kind of boycott happen with all the other countries that are legitimately worthy of boycott?
Are you suggesting that we are legitimately worthy of boycott?
We are not legitimately worthy of boycott. There are many countries that I would argue.
Yeah.
No,
So,
I mean, I guess,
right.
No, I don't think I'm sorry. I don't agree, of course, that one should be boycotting a country. Researchers from a country where you don't agree with their political activities or their history. I mean, Canada certainly has agreed that it has been a colonialist country, actually. But the point is, do these other boycotts happen with other countries?
So the answer is a bit complicated, but not a lot. The simple answer to your question is that is no. So all of those countries that you would think would be worthy of a boycott with
China.
China is a complicated issue. I'll talk about it briefly for a second, but there are countries with track record, which is, notorious for human rights violations, for engaging in war, etc., that are not boycotted at all. But I think the boycott has been made easier for those who support it and those who push for it by the fact that, at least in Europe, Russia, after the invasion to Ukraine, was also boycotted. So there is a current academic boycott against Russia. Israel is often compared with Russia, not with Ukraine. And the precedent of having an active boycott against Russian universities is often something that we need to argue against and fight. There are important differences. Legally and politically, the decision to boycott Russia and to issue economic sanctions against Russia was a decision that was made internationally and by the European Union. And this is not a decision that has been made against Israel. So the universities are not compelled at all to take these measures against Israeli universities as they were against Russia. Of course, in terms of the actual, blame game, etc., we believe that we are situated exactly on the reverse from Russia. But that is helpful to a very small degree if you're trying to push this argument in an environment where other arguments are more successful, like the genocide argument, and so on. By the way, one of the things that our team has worked on, prioritized, and produced was substantive arguments, both against books that came out and accused Israeli universities in abusing Palestinians and discriminated against them, and against the argument of genocide itself. And I want to credit here Professor Barak Medina, who wrote important pieces on this. And that was a decision that we made as a team to invest resources on that front. And we know that these contributions that we worked on were very helpful to many of our allies and people who wanted to defy the boycotts. But going back to the answer to your question, I mean, we have suffered from the spotlight that Israel typically gets in international fora, also in this regard. China is a complicated case. Nobody boycotts China, but some countries, for example, the United States, have laws to regulate how much information is passed to China. And also Chinese universities, like, by the way, Russian universities, are not independent research institutions, unlike us. And so they don't have academic freedom, and they don't always have academic integrity. So there are reasons not to collaborate with them that some universities employ that are entirely different from the political reasons that they're using against us. So we're not equally situated or similar situated also in that sense.
Thank you.
Professor Barak-Corren, we have a question here from Professor Netta Barak-Corren, who's stating it would be helpful to get written information that we may send to international colleagues, possibly in the form of common questions and answers.
Yes. So we also established a website that is accessible through the Hebrew University International platform, with lots of information. It has summaries, it has visuals, it has examples of the kind of activities that we do that typically colleagues around the world are not familiar with, and really defy this libel that we are sort of a discriminatory and segregationist institution that we sometimes hear. So all of this is available online, and I guess that we can find a way to share it with everybody here. And we're also working constantly on expanding and adding to this material. So we are actually in the process of creating something more detailed now. And I guess this will be uploaded there when we're done. But there are already a lot of material on the website.
Denise Joseph is asking, is there any difference in your experience with scientific institutions versus liberal arts institutions?
Is there any difference in experience with scientific institution versus liberal arts institutions? I mean, if we're think it's different in every country, and I think We have not seen that scientific institutions, quote unquote, deal with anti-Semitism or anti-Israel bias better than liberal arts colleges over the past year. For example, MIT or Columbia or Harvard and other important and impressive institutions have seen their share of encampments and everything that comes with it. I do think that we do see a difference that is institutional, but more importantly, maybe country based. We see that the boycott movement is very strong in specific countries. I think we can safely say that these countries consist of at least Spain, Ireland, Belgium, the Netherlands, Canada, and a few more. We care about all of these countries, but some of them have institutions that we care about more than others because our scholars have more collaborations with them. But essentially, we see that this is a country-based phenomena. And the United States vary based on state sometimes and based on the kind of institution. But we saw the spread of anti-Israelism and anti-Israel universities all throughout many disciplines and many institutions, even reaching places that we never thought it's going to reach, like computer science, for example. So it's far beyond humanities and liberal arts college at that point.
Monette, you raised your hand?
Yes, I did. I'm just curious as how the impact is on the researchers themselves in Israel. What kind of an impact this having on the researchers whose projects are really being boycotted and not moving further?
Yes, this is a really important question. So first, I want to say, I'm sure you'll hear much more about all of the wonderful things that go on after I'm done speaking. Please remember that I am now looking at the world from a very specific angle. We have seen an enormous rise in boycott activity, but it still reaches in relative terms, we estimate it to be something like 15% of our international collaborations. So I think, the way I view our work is to do the problem solving for our researchers when they have the misfortune of facing a boycott. But most of our researchers do continue with their relationships worldwide without interruption. And so it's dangerous and it's spreading and it is contagious, but it's also at this point is not something that each and every one of our researchers have faced. I don't want to make it seem as though this is the case. We do, however, see that our researchers more generally, when they go abroad, they have this concern and they ask for our help. That you see how concerned they are to go abroad and interact with colleagues. It doesn't happen necessarily everywhere, but it's more widespread than the boycott itself, the chilling effect that it produced. For the researchers who do face the boycott, I can tell you that we had a lot of successes. So for most of the projects, we were able to make them work and continue or find creative solutions. But for very early stages boycotts, for example, when two researchers want to collaborate and the collaboration hasn't been consolidated yet, we are typically not that helpful at that stage because the chilling effect that the institution produces and the lack of established contract is often enough to deter. When there is an established contract, there is lots that we could do. With regulators, with lawyers, etc. When it's just at the initial stage and two researchers want to collaborate and then one institution frighten its home institution from collaborating, typically we have very little to do, especially, by the way, when it comes to junior scholars, when they don't have tenure yet and they just really don't want it to interfere with their career. So, it is what it is, but I am personally very glad that most of our researchers continue with their work and don't really have to think about the boycott. And as long as this is a situation, I think that there's also a half full side of the glass that we can look to.
Sure. Can I ask you one more question? Because I'm from Canada. And it hurts us, obviously, in Canada to be considered. I'm originally from Belgium, so you talked about two countries, unfortunately, that I'm
your heritage.
exactly. And is it as bad here as it is in Europe? Is it all over Canada? Is it in certain areas of Canada? Just to be understanding.
I can give you the hot spots. British Columbia, Concordia, Toronto, McMaster, McGill. These are the major Canadian institutions of higher education. We had boycott attempts, votes, unions voting on boycotts in all of these. We were able to fight some of these boycotts successfully, sometimes only to see some kind of horrendous boycott event spreading a few months afterwards. We still have institutional ties with all of these institutions. There was only one Canadian university that actually went all the way and issued a boycott. This is Windsor University. We didn't have a lot of collaborations with them, but we filed a complaint against them with Canadian colleagues at the regulator. This is still pending, but we worked on that. Among the things that we discovered when we prepared the complaint is the tremendous amount of collaborative work of Israeli scholars, especially at Hebrew U, and Canadian scholars producing dozens of thousands of joint articles, for example, including top articles in top journals. So we hope that this complaint will end up positively and maybe create a good precedent. But this is something that we're still following.
Thank you. So I love my heritage, but what can I tell you?
We have one last question from Tali Lipkin-Shahak. I hope I'm repeating it correctly. She asks if the university's response to political and social happenings in Israel had any influence at all on the boycott.
Very good question. This is something that we debated for quite some time among us in the task force, and we got a lot of faculty who expressed opinions about that. I can tell you that I can give you two anecdotes which persuaded me personally that the answer is no. It has no actual impact on the boycott. The first is that the essentially Association of Spanish Universities also happened with Italian, but the Association of Spanish Universities wrote this sort of bombastic letter saying that they recommend cutting ties with every Israeli university that does not support peace. And then came the Association of Israeli Universities and wrote a letter that was based on our writing that told them about all of the important things that are done for peace and equality among Israeli universities, and said unequivocally that Israeli universities support peace. The result was we never got a response from the Spanish universities, and almost all of those universities implemented boycotts. The second kind of example or experience we had was when our Senate accepted in June a decision that calls for the end of war, for ceasefire, etc., made very little impression on all of the many universities that said that they would collaborate only with an Israeli university who would support ceasefire. Made no impact on them. So I think, at this stage, universities that committed to boycott are not at all, considering revisiting it, unless they're pressured to do so by their regulators or by a very successful coordinated push from within, from among their faculty, which sometimes we do see, and we try to help when we see it.
Just a